When I first heard about the old schoolhouse at the edge of town, I thought it was just one of those stories kids told to scare each other. Everyone said it was haunted. Some claimed they saw strange lights coming from the windows at night, while others swore they heard whispers in the wind when they walked by. It was an old brick building, long abandoned and overgrown with weeds. The roof was caving in, and the windows were shattered. No one had set foot in there for years, or so I thought. One day after school, my friend Alex dared me to go inside with him. "Come on, it's just an old building. Nothing's going to happen," he said with a grin, holding up the flashlight he'd brought. I hesitated. It didn't feel right, but I didn't want him to think I was scared. "Fine," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. We made our way to the back entrance, where the door hung on its hinges, creaking with the wind. The moment we stepped inside, the air felt colder, and a heavy silence filled the room. We wandered through the hallways, dust clinging to our shoes. The place smelled musty, like old books left in the rain for too long. Our footsteps echoed loudly, and every now and then, I thought I heard something else, something faint, like footsteps that weren't ours. But every time I stopped to listen, there was nothing. The first floor was mostly classrooms, all of them empty except for broken chairs and desks. Alex and I poked around, but there wasn't much to see. Just an old school that had been forgotten. "Let's check upstairs," Alex suggested, pointing to a staircase at the end of the hall. I didn't want to go. Something about the second floor seemed wrong. I couldn't explain it, but a heavy feeling settled in my stomach, like a warning. But Alex was already halfway up the stairs, so I had no choice but to follow. The second floor was darker, with fewer windows and thicker shadows. The flashlight barely cut through the gloom. We moved cautiously, the silence pressing in from all sides. It was colder up here too, and I shivered. Then we heard it, soft at first, like a faint hum. It grew louder the further we walked, until it was unmistakable. It was singing, not a happy tune but something slow and mournful, like a lullaby twisted into something wrong. Alex froze, looking at me wide-eyed. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was coming from one of the classrooms ahead. We crept toward it, the singing growing louder with each step. My hands shook, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. Alex pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room looked like any other, except for the figures sitting at one of the desks. A girl with long black hair covering her face, wearing an old-fashioned school uniform. She was rocking back and forth, humming that same eerie song. Neither of us moved. The air felt thick, and I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up. The girl stopped humming. Slowly, her head turned toward us, revealing her pale, hollow eyes. I grabbed Alex's arm, yanking him back. "We need to go. Now." He didn't argue. We bolted down the hallway, feet slamming against the floor. The singing started again, but it was different this time, louder, sharper, almost like it was chasing us. We tore down the stairs, not daring to look back. When we finally burst through the door into the daylight, we didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street. Gasping for breath, we finally slowed down, exchanging terrified looks. What was that?" Alex stammered. "I don't know," I managed to say. But one thing was clear, we weren't going back to that schoolhouse again. Ever. Since that day, I've stayed away from the edge of town. Sometimes, though, late at night, I think I can still hear that haunting song drifting on the wind, and I wonder if the old schoolhouse is still waiting, with that girl inside, singing her terrible lullaby. I'd always been curious about the janitor's closet at Eastwood High. No one ever went in there, except for Mr. Harris, the janitor, and even he only spent a few minutes inside before quickly locking it back up. It was a narrow, wooden door at the end of the first-floor hallway, tucked behind the old gymnasium that hadn't been used in years. Most students barely noticed it, but I did. Every time I passed by, I got this weird feeling, like there was something behind that door watching me. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but there was something off about it. One afternoon after school, I saw Mr. Harris heading toward the closet with his keys jangling at his side. He was an older man, always wearing a faded blue jumpsuit, and he didn't talk much. As usual, he glanced around nervously before unlocking the door and stepping inside. This time, though, the door didn't close all the way. I couldn't help myself. I tiptoed down the hallway, watching as Mr. Harris disappeared into the dark room. A flickering light bulb above the door buzzed softly, adding to the eerie atmosphere. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the door handle and peeked inside. The closet was bigger than I expected. Shelves lined the walls, filled with cleaning supplies, mops, buckets, old rags. But what really caught my eye was the staircase in the back, leading down into the darkness. I stepped inside without thinking. It was as if the room was pulling me in. The air was colder here, heavy with the smell of bleach and something else, something metallic. My fingers brushed the stair railing as I leaned in, trying to see where the stairs led. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Harris's voice was low and harsh, startling me. He stood at the entrance, his face twisted in a scowl. Nothing," I stammered, backing away from the stairs. I didn't mean to." He grabbed me by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong for someone his age. "You shouldn't be in here," he growled. "This place isn't for students." "I'm sorry, I didn't know," I started to say, but he wasn't listening. He shoved me out the door and slammed it shut behind me. I heard the click of the lock before he disappeared back inside. I walked away as fast as I could, my heart still racing. I couldn't get the image of that staircase out of my head. Why was it there? Where did it lead? And why was Mr. Harris so secretive about it? For the next few days I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. My mind kept going back to that strange, dark staircase. Something about it felt wrong, and I had to know what it was. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The following Friday, the school was empty for a teacher workday. I knew Mr. Harris would still be around, but the halls would be deserted otherwise. I figured if I was careful, I could sneak into the janitor's closet again and explore the stairs without getting caught. So, after school let out, I grabbed a flashlight and waited until I saw Mr. Harris leave the building for his lunch break. I hurried down the empty hallway toward the closet. The building was eerily quiet, every sound amplified in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the door. I pulled a bobby pin from my pocket, something I'd learned to use after watching too many movies, and fumbled with the lock for a few minutes. Eventually, it clicked open. I slipped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The room looked the same as before, shelves of cleaning supplies, dim lighting, and that same cold, metallic smell. I made my way to the back where the staircase waited, descending into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, but then turned on my flashlight and took the first step. The stairs creaked under my weight as I slowly made my way down. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and the smell intensified, rusty, like blood. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the growing knot of fear in my stomach. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a narrow hallway with concrete walls. The sound of dripping water echoed through the space, though I couldn't see where it was coming from. The walls were damp, and the floor was slick under my feet. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows along the corridor. I kept walking, my breath shallow and quick. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, with no doors or windows in sight. The further I went, the stronger the smell became, until it was almost overwhelming. And then, I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like something dragging across the concrete floor. I stopped, shining my flashlight ahead, but I couldn't see anything. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept moving. the sound growing louder with each step. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, just around the corner. My hand shook as I rounded the bend, my flashlight illuminating the source of the noise. At the end of the hallway was a metal door, slightly ajar. The scratching sound was coming from behind it. I froze, unsure if I should go any further, but curiosity got the better of me. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges squealing loudly. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was small, with flickering fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was an old wooden desk, and chained to the wall behind it was a figure. It was a girl, her clothes tattered and dirty, her hair hanging in matted clumps over her face. She was hunched over, scratching at the floor with her fingernails, which were worn down to bloody stubs. I gasped, stepping back in horror. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and glassy, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Her skin was pale and bruised, her wrists and ankles bound by heavy chains. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. What was this? Why was she here? My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't make sense of any of it. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see Mr. Harris standing in the doorway, his expression cold and angry. "I told you to stay out of here," he said, his voice low and menacing. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was frozen in place, too terrified to move. Mr. Harris stepped forward, closing the door behind him. "You shouldn't have come back." What is this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe, the needle gleaming in the dim light. I backed away, my legs trembling. "No, please." He advanced on me, his eyes dark and cold. "It's too late for Tat." I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced down the hallway. I could hear Mr. Harris's footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the staircase and scrambled up the steps. I burst through the door and into the school hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold onto the bobby pin. Finally, the lock clicked into place, and I backed away from the door, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I was out of the building, my legs carrying me as far away from the school as possible. I never went back to Eastwood High after that day. I told my parents that I wanted to transfer schools, and after a few weeks of begging, they finally agreed. I never told anyone what I saw in the janitor's closet. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the sound of scratching. And I wonder if that girl is still down there, chained to the wall, waiting for someone to find her.